She sat alone in first class, her small hands gripping the armrests as the engines rumbled beneath her. The navy blue dress her grandmother had bought for church made her look older than 13, but the fear in her eyes reminded everyone she was still a child. A small travel badge on her chest read, Amara J. Williams. Across the aisle, a flight attendant smiled brightly at a businessman ordering champagne. But when the attendant's eyes shifted toward the young girl, that warmth disappeared, replaced by a tight, dismissive expression. "Can I please have some ginger ale?" the child asked softly. "I'm feeling sick." The attendant leaned down, her voice sharp enough for others to hear. "You people always want something for free. This isn't a charity flight." The words cut deeper than turbulence ever could. The little girl froze, unsure whether to cry or apologize. Around her, no one spoke. Some turned away. Others pretended not to notice. But what the attendant didn't realize, just a few rows back, a man in a baseball cap had seen everything. Quiet, observant, his dark eyes locked on the scene with growing fury. To everyone else, he looked like an ordinary passenger. But this man wasn't ordinary at all. His name was Malcolm Rivers, and he wasn't just another traveler. He was the undercover owner of the very airline that flight attendant worked for. For now, he stayed silent, studying every move, every cruel glance, because this wasn't just a bad interaction. It was the proof he'd been waiting for. 3 weeks earlier, an anonymous whistleblower inside his company had sent him a file of suppressed complaints, stories from passengers of color who'd been insulted, ignored, even removed from flights. He hadn't wanted to believe it, but what he was seeing now confirmed his worst fear. The rot wasn't at the bottom of the company. It had spread all the way through. He pressed record on his phone. Every word, every gesture captured. As the child blinked back tears, too humiliated to speak, Malcolm leaned back in his seat, heart pounding. He could destroy that attendant's career with one call. But he wasn't after one person. He wanted the truth and justice that couldn't be buried under paperwork or corporate spin. What neither of them knew was that this flight, this moment at 30,000 feet, would set off a chain of events that changed an entire airline forever. Because sometimes the person you least expect to hold power is the one watching quietly, waiting for the right moment to reveal who they really are. Detroit mornings had a way of feeling gray even when the sun was out. Inside a small brick home near Grand River Avenue, the hum of an old refrigerator mixed with the sound of a coffee pot sputtering its last drops. In the kitchen, a woman in a faded cleaning uniform carefully pressed a note into her daughter's palm. "Remember, baby," she whispered, adjusting the collar of that same navy blue dress. "You belong anywhere you go. Don't let anyone make you feel different." The girl nodded, clutching her small backpack, the one filled with math notes and dreams too big for her 13 years. She wasn't going on vacation. She was flying to Los Angeles to compete in the National Mathematics Championship. It had taken everything for her parents to buy that first-class ticket. Her father had picked up double shifts at the auto plant. Her mother had cleaned offices on weekends. Together, they'd borrowed from family, scraping every dollar to make sure their daughter could travel safely, with comfort and with dignity. They wanted her to know she was worth that seat, no matter who doubted it. As they drove to the airport, the girl stared out the window at the passing neighborhoods. She didn't see broken houses or cracked sidewalks. She saw beginnings. "When I win," she told herself, "I'll fix everything." At the same time, hundreds of miles away, the man in the baseball cap, Malcolm, stood in front of his mirror, dressed down for anonymity. No designer suit, no tailored coat, just jeans, a worn t-shirt, and the calm confidence of someone who'd built empires in silence. At 43, he was the CEO and majority owner of North Star Air, one of the largest airline networks in the country. But he hadn't always lived in boardrooms and penthouses. His childhood was carved out of the same concrete struggle as the girls, raised by a single mother who cleaned hotels by day and studied for her nursing degree at night. That history had built a fire inside him, and when an anonymous employee emailed him evidence of racial bias in his own company's flight crew, that fire turned into resolve. The message had been simple. They treat people differently, sir. Especially children. I've seen it happen over and over again. And every time someone reports it, it disappears. Attached were passenger complaints, video clips, and internal memos, all pointing to a toxic pattern of discrimination ignored by management. He could have handled it quietly, through HR or public relations. But he wanted the truth raw, unfiltered. So he made a decision no billionaire CEO had ever made before. He would go undercover. He booked an economy ticket under a fake name, carrying nothing but a phone, a notebook, and a plan. The morning of the flight, their paths unknowingly aligned at Detroit Metro Airport. The girl, small and neatly dressed, clutched her boarding pass with trembling hands. A flight attendant had smiled politely as she handed over the ticket. "First class, huh?" the woman said, half surprised. The tone wasn't cruel, just coated with that disbelief that said people like, "You don't usually sit up there." Meanwhile, Malcolm moved quietly through the economy line, blending in among the crowd of travelers with earbuds, coffee cups, and weary faces. His assistant had offered to send a private jet. He refused. "If I want to understand what's broken," he'd said, "I need to see it from where they sit." As the passengers boarded Flight 447 to Los Angeles, he noticed the difference instantly. First-class passengers, mostly white, mostly older, were greeted with smiles, light jokes, and warm towels. The economy line, efficient, impersonal, mechanical. He took a seat in row 22, close enough to observe first class, but far enough to stay invisible. The engines roared to life. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Northstar Flight 447 to Los Angeles. Estimated flight time, 4 hours and 40 minutes. Malcolm's gaze shifted forward. The girl in seat 3A adjusted her seatbelt nervously, tapping her foot as the plane began to taxi. He smiled faintly. He could sense that mix of fear and excitement, the kind only people chasing something bigger than themselves ever felt. When the plane lifted off, sunlight poured through the windows, turning the cabin into a warm haze of gold and white. The girl pulled out her tablet, whispering formulas under her breath. Numbers steadied her heart. They always had. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. Drinks were served. Passengers laughed softly over small talk and magazines. Then came the turbulence. It wasn't severe, just enough to jostle the tray tables and unsettle stomachs. Malcolm noticed a shift in the cabin's mood immediately. People grew tense. The girl clutched her seatbelt, eyes closed, breathing unevenly. After a moment, she pressed the call button above her seat. A polite chime echoed. The same flight attendant who'd been handing out drinks, a woman with bright lipstick and a pinched expression, approached her row. "Yes?" she asked, impatient already. "Excuse me," the girl said softly. "I'm not feeling well. Could I please have some ginger ale? I think I'm a little motion sick." Malcolm's jaw tightened. The words "you people" hadn't come yet. Not yet. But he saw the shift. The tightening eyes. The subtle sneer. The kind of look that always came before cruelty. He pressed his phone slightly higher on the armrest, camera recording, when the attendant delivered that cutting line. "You people always want something for free." He didn't move. He just kept filming. Because silence was sometimes the most powerful weapon in the war built on arrogance. The girl's face crumpled, her voice breaking. "I can pay for it," she whispered. But the attendant had already turned away. Malcolm felt his chest tighten. He had been that child once, humiliated by someone with a smile and a rulebook. The pain of it burned deep, decades old, still alive. He wanted to stand, to say something, to end it. But he knew better. This wasn't just about that flight attendant. This was about a system, and systems required proof, not emotion. He leaned back, breathing slowly, filming the entire exchange. 20 minutes later, the cabin began meal service. The difference between passengers was no longer subtle. It was theatrical. The businessman in seat 1A was offered 2 dinner options, a warm towel and champagne. The woman beside him received an extra dessert. On the house. When the tray reached the girl, it wasn't plated on china or accompanied by silverware. It was a prepackaged sandwich, tossed onto her tray with a small bottle of water. The attendant muttered something about limited stock. Malcolm's hand curled into a fist. Then he heard it, a whisper from another flight attendant to the cabin manager nearby. "She's just a kid, Derek. Maybe we should." "Let it go," the manager replied coldly. "We don't need another complaint on record." Every word captured on camera, every one of them sealing their own fate. By hour 3, the girl was pale, trembling, and struggling to keep calm. Her stomach churned with anxiety and shame. When she pressed the call button again, not for comfort, but for help, her voice barely worked. "I think I need medical help," she murmured. The attendant sighed audibly, her patience gone. "Just breathe, sweetheart. You'll be fine." She didn't call for assistance. She didn't offer water. She didn't care. And that was when Malcolm stood up. For the first time since takeoff, he broke his cover, not with anger, but with authority so quiet it demanded silence. He walked down the aisle toward first class. Every passenger turned to look. The flight attendant froze, recognizing something in his expression, something she couldn't name but instinctively feared. "Excuse me," he said, voice calm but sharp as glass. "That young lady asked for help, and she's going to get it." The moment Malcolm stepped into first class, the atmosphere shifted like pressure before a storm. Every whisper stopped. Every motion slowed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't announce who he was. He simply stood in the aisle, looking down at the trembling girl and then at the woman who had humiliated her. "Is there a medical kit on board?" he asked evenly. The attendant blinked, caught between confusion and arrogance. "Sir, please return to your seat. We're handling the situation." He didn't move. "No, you're not." His tone wasn't confrontational. It was absolute. The kind of voice people didn't argue with because it carried something heavier than authority. Conviction. A few passengers glanced nervously at each other. The man in 1A lowered his newspaper. A woman across the aisle whispered, "What's happening?" Malcolm turned back toward the girl. Her hands trembled on her lap, fingers white from gripping the seat belt. "She's a child," he said quietly, almost to himself. "And you've forgotten what that means." He reached into the seat pocket beside her, retrieved the air sickness bag, and placed it gently in her lap. Then he pressed the call button himself. Within seconds, the second flight attendant, Jennifer, the one who had looked uneasy earlier, appeared. "Can you please get some ginger ale? And maybe a cool cloth," he said, still calm. She nodded quickly. "Yes, of course." The other attendant, the one who had started all of this, tried to interject. "Sir, there's no need to make a—" But Malcolm's eyes cut to hers, steady and unflinching. "You've made enough of one already." Jennifer returned moments later with a bottle of ginger ale and a small towel dampened with cool water. Malcolm helped the girl sip slowly, steadying her hand so she wouldn't spill. The plane was quiet now. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade. Something about the simplicity of his actions, the calm precision, made people realize this wasn't just about one child's discomfort. This was something deeper, something wrong that had just been exposed. The girl began to breathe normally again. The color returned to her face. Her eyes met his, questioning, frightened, grateful. "Try small sips," he said softly. "You'll be okay." When he stood to return to his seat, she whispered, "Thank you." He just smiled faintly. "You don't owe anyone for kindness." Then he turned back down the aisle, the phone still recording quietly in his hand. In the galley, the cabin manager, Derek, was waiting, irritation written across his face. "Sir, I understand you're trying to help, but we can't have passengers interfering with crew operations. Please return to economy." Malcolm's expression didn't change. "Then do your job, because if a child gets sick on your flight and your crew ignores it, the FAA will have more than turbulence to investigate." Derek hesitated. Something in the man's tone, confident but calm, professional yet commanding, made him pause. "Who exactly are you?" he asked finally. Malcolm smiled just enough to disarm, not reveal. "Someone who believes accountability starts in the sky." Then he returned to his seat, without another word. From then on, The crew's behavior grew tense. The lead attendant's smile became mechanical, her movements sharp and defensive. Jennifer continued quietly serving the girl with care, even sneaking her a warm roll and a small dessert plate, something she whispered she found left over. But the damage was already done. Word had spread among the passengers. Discreet whispers rippled through the cabin. Phones tilted upward. Eyes darted toward the girl, sympathy in some, judgment in others. The plane had become a microcosm of something much larger, a society mid-denial of its prejudice, suddenly forced to look at itself under a stranger's lens. By the third hour of flight, Malcolm had all the footage he needed, but the story wasn't over. He'd seen this before. Systems hiding behind politeness, pretending fairness while quietly punishing difference. He couldn't let it slide. He opened his phone's note app, typing with calm precision. Document full incident. File report under equity investigation. Review crew logs. Identify captain communication chain. He planned to review every minute of recorded service after landing, but deep down he already knew this was going to be bigger than a single crew reprimand. It was going to be a reckoning. As the flight continued, the storm outside mirrored the one inside. Clouds thickened over the Midwest, and lightning flashed distantly through the windows. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing turbulence ahead. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. The girl clutched her blanket tighter, staring out the window as rain streaked across the glass. Malcolm, from his seat, watched her silhouette against the glow of the wing light. Small, still, and heartbreakingly alone. For him, it wasn't just pity, it was recognition. He'd been that child once, sitting quietly in a place where people assumed he didn't belong. The memories rose like ghosts. A security guard trailing him through a store, a teacher assuming his scholarship was diversity-based, a business partner who once asked him to stand aside for optics during a press photo. All those moments had hardened into composure, the kind of composure now holding him in his seat when every instinct told him to shout. Then came the announcement that turned quiet discomfort into open tension. The captain asked all passengers to fasten seat belts as the plane hit a rough patch of turbulence. Trays rattled. A few gasps filled the air. The lead attendant hurried down the aisle, not toward the frightened girl, but toward a group of businessmen complaining about delayed drink service. When one of the overhead compartments popped open near row 3, a bag slid out, narrowly missing the girl's head. Jennifer rushed forward, but before she could reach it, Malcolm was already there. He grabbed the bag midair and steadied it with one hand. "You all right?" he asked. The girl nodded weakly, clutching her backpack. The attendant turned, clearly embarrassed. "Sir, please, you shouldn't." "Move during turbulence," he finished for her. "Neither should negligence." The line wasn't loud, but every nearby passenger heard it. Even Derek, the cabin manager, looked unsettled now. The mask of corporate composure had cracked. Minutes later, the turbulence passed. The captain's voice returned, apologizing for the disruption. But the disruption that mattered had already happened. A woman seated across from the girl leaned over. "Sweetheart," she said kindly, "do you need some water? I have an extra." The girl nodded, whispering a thank you. That simple gesture, quiet empathy from a stranger, broke the spell of silence. More passengers began murmuring softly about what they'd seen. Phones came out again. Evidence multiplied. For the first time, the system that relied on silence found itself surrounded by witnesses. Meanwhile, Derek was in the galley, whispering furiously to the flight crew. "That man, the one from economy, is filming. If this gets out, we're finished. Someone needs to talk to him." Stacy, the lead attendant, crossed her arms. "He's just trying to stir drama. I did nothing wrong. That girl's probably exaggerating anyway." Jennifer spoke up, quietly but firmly. "She's a child, Stacy. She didn't do anything wrong. You did." Silence. Derek glared. "Watch your tone, Jennifer. You want to keep your job. You keep your opinions to yourself." Malcolm, seated nearby, heard everything. The galley curtain wasn't soundproof, not even close. He tapped the record button once more. This wasn't going to end midair. This was going to end in a courtroom. As the plane began its descent toward Los Angeles, the sunlight returned, streaking through clouds like quiet redemption. The girl leaned against the window, exhausted but calmer now. Malcolm watched her from a few rows back. Something in her gaze had changed, not fear, but resolve. He admired that. When the wheels touched down and applause rippled softly through the cabin, he stood. The attendants prepared their rehearsed goodbyes. Stacy avoided eye contact. Jennifer looked like she might cry. Derek simply crossed his arms, waiting for this long, cursed flight to end. Malcolm let most passengers disembark first. The girl gathered her backpack and walked toward the exit, shoulders slightly hunched, but head held high. As she reached the doorway, Stacy forced a brittle smile. "Have a good day, sweetie." The girl paused. "I will," she said, voice trembling but strong. "Someday you'll remember this flight." Then she walked away. Malcolm followed a few steps behind, stopping just long enough to hand the captain his business card. "Tell your company's legal team," he said quietly. "They'll be hearing from me." The captain frowned, confused, reading the embossed text. Malcolm Rivers, Chief Executive Officer, North Star Air. Color drained from his face. Malcolm continued down the jet bridge without another word. Outside the gate, the air smelled of coffee and jet fuel. The girl was sitting on a bench, staring down at her tablet. Not working, just holding it like an anchor. He walked over and sat beside her. "Feeling better?" She nodded faintly. "Yes, sir. Thank you for helping me back there." He smiled, that same quiet, steady smile. "You helped yourself. I just reminded them to see you." For a moment, she hesitated. "Were you really an economy?" "I go where the truth hides," he said simply. She looked puzzled, not yet understanding what that meant. He reached into his pocket and handed her a card. Not one of his corporate ones, but a handwritten note. "Keep believing you belong everywhere you go." She held it like something sacred. When he stood to leave, she whispered, "Are they going to get in trouble?" "Oh," he said, eyes glinting with quiet fire. "You'll see." That night, as the world below slept, 3 separate videos appeared online, clips from passengers who'd recorded the incident. Each one told the same story. A young black girl humiliated for daring to sit in first class, and a man who stood up when no one else would. Within hours, the footage went viral. Hashtag spread. News outlets picked it up by morning. Hashtag Flight 447 trended worldwide. The airline's PR department scrambled to release statements. Investigations were announced. Executives panicked. And inside his penthouse overlooking downtown Los Angeles, Malcolm sat at his desk, reviewing the footage frame by frame. Every cruel word, every look of dismissal, every failure to act. He didn't feel triumph, only responsibility. The next day, he scheduled a board meeting, not with the usual filtered briefings, but with raw video playing on the big screen. "This," he said to his stunned executives, "is what happens when empathy disappears, when the people who work for us forget who they serve." No one spoke. He leaned forward, hands clasped. "We are not running an airline. We are running a promise that every person who steps onto one of our planes belongs there, no matter the color of their skin." By sunrise, the story had broken every firewall in corporate America. Headlines screamed across every major outlet. Black girl humiliated in first class, rescued by mysterious passenger. North Star flight scandal. Airline faces backlash after viral video. The girl's face, blurred by ethical newsrooms, but unmistakable to those who'd seen the video firsthand, became a symbol overnight. A symbol of something bigger than one flight or one crew. Inside North Star Air's headquarters, every executive's phone vibrated nonstop. PR teams flooded the elevators. Lawyers whispered in glass offices, faces pale with damage control. And at the top floor, behind a door marked simply Office of the CEO, Malcolm Rivers watched the storm he'd ignited. He stood by the window, watching the city awaken. Cars crept through mist. Screens on nearby buildings flashed news reels. His airline's planes soaring across digital skies. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd built North Star to mean progress, opportunity, fairness. And yet, Prejudice had snuck on board wearing his uniform. He turned as his assistant, Morgan, burst in, tablet in hand, eyes wide. "Sir, it's everywhere. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, even morning talk shows. We're trending #1 globally." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "Damage reports? Stocks down 3%. Our sponsors are requesting statements. The board called an emergency meeting in 1 hour." He nodded, unmoved. "Let them call it. I'll be ready." The boardroom. The conference room felt colder than usual. A wall of glass overlooking the skyline, polished with tables stretching endlessly. A dozen board members sat in silence, their expressions a mix of fear, anger, and disbelief. At the far end, Malcolm entered without fanfare. No entourage, no documents, just his phone and a black folder. The chairman, an older man with silver hair and practiced calm, spoke first. "Malcolm, this incident, it's catastrophic. Why didn't you tell us sooner that you were involved?" Malcolm set his phone down, its screen still playing the viral clip on loop. The moment Stacy snapped at the little girl, her cruel tone echoing through the cabin. The entire room went still. "I didn't tell you," he said slowly, "because I wanted you to see it the same way the world did, unfiltered. I wanted you to feel what I felt." The chairman exhaled sharply. "You could have protected us." Malcolm's voice hardened. "Protected who?" "The company. Or the people who made a child cry because they couldn't see her worth." An uncomfortable silence followed. Another board member, a woman in a gray blazer, cleared her throat. "Malcolm, no one is excusing what happened. But we have to think strategically. If you release an official statement condemning the staff, your own staff, it'll look like chaos. Investors want unity." He looked around the table, one face at a time. Unity means nothing without integrity. The room stayed silent. He tapped his folder, sliding it open. "You all think this is about optics. It's not. It's about what we allow when no one's watching." He revealed a second set of documents, internal reports he'd quietly commissioned months ago. Crew bias complaints, passenger allegations, patterns of selective service, disproportionately targeting black and brown travelers. Every page was dated before the incident. Gasps filled the room. "I gave you all warnings," he said quietly. "You ignored them. Now the world sees what we refused to fix." The chairman rubbed his temple. "Malcolm, be realistic. This kind of exposure could ruin your legacy." Malcolm smiled faintly, but his eyes were fire. A legacy built on silence isn't worth keeping. The media firestorm. By afternoon, the world had turned its gaze toward North Star's headquarters. News vans lined the block. Cameras flashed every time an employee exited the building. Protesters gathered with handmade signs. "Dignity at 30,000 feet. Accountability takes flight." Inside his office, Malcolm sat alone, replaying the raw footage again, this time focusing on the little girl's eyes. Her composure. Her quiet bravery. Morgan entered, cautious. "Sir, she's been identified. Her family reached out. They'd like to meet you." He paused the video. "How's she doing?" "She's okay. Still shaken. But her mother said she keeps talking about the man who told her she belonged." Malcolm's chest tightened. "Set up a meeting. Privately." Morgan hesitated. "The press will find out." "Then let them," he said. "Truth doesn't hide behind closed doors." The meeting. 2 days later, in a quiet community center in south-central Los Angeles, Malcolm met the girl and her mother. The child, Amara, looked different now. Braver, her braids neatly tied, her backpack covered with new pins that read things like "Future Pilot" and "Dream Big." Her mother, a teacher named Monique, extended her hand. "Mr. Rivers, thank you for what you did. I had no idea who you were. I just know you stood up for my baby when no one else did." Malcolm smiled gently. She didn't need a savior. She needed someone to stop pretending not to see. Monique's eyes glistened. "That day could have gone so differently. I thought flying first class would show her she could belong anywhere. I didn't expect it to break her." Malcolm kneeled beside Amara, meeting her eye level. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" She thought for a moment. "A pilot." His smile widened. Then I'll make sure your first lesson's on us. Her face lit up. Really, really, he said. You'll see that the sky belongs to you, too. Monique's tears fell freely then, and Malcolm placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. I can't undo what happened, but I can promise it won't happen again. Corporate reckoning. The next morning, Malcolm held a press conference. The room was packed, reporters shoulder to shoulder, microphones crowding the podium. Cameras blinked like fireflies in the dark. He stepped up to the mic, steady, composed, wearing a charcoal suit with the North Star emblem gleaming on his lapel. I stand before you not just as CEO, he began, but as a man who has seen what silence costs. He paused, letting the murmurs fade. On Flight 447, a young black girl was humiliated by people wearing our logo. She was questioned, dismissed, and reduced to a stereotype. But that flight didn't just expose them, it exposed us. Reporters scribbled. Camera shutters clicked. For too long, industries have hidden discrimination behind protocol. Not anymore. Starting today, North Star Air will undergo the largest internal reform in aviation history. Every employee, from executives to attendants, will complete our new program, Empathy First. He continued, voice rising slightly. We will also fund scholarships for underrepresented youth pursuing aviation careers. And we will sponsor mentorships for every child who's ever been told they don't belong in first class. The crowd erupted in questions. Mr. Rivers, was this your idea? Are you resigning? Are you admitting systemic racism exists in your company? Malcolm raised a hand, silencing the room. I'm not resigning. I'm rebuilding. That line made every headline within the hour. CEO refuses to resign, vows to rebuild airline from inside out. The pushback. But not everyone approved. Behind the scenes, board members whispered about reputation management, investors threatened withdrawal, and lobbyists hinted at overcorrection. Late that night, Malcolm's phone buzzed. It was the chairman. You've gone too far, Malcolm, the older man said. You're turning this into a political crusade. Malcolm's voice was low, steady. If treating people with respect feels political, maybe that's the real problem. Be careful, the chairman warned. They'll come for you next. Malcolm looked out over the city lights, millions of flickering windows, each one a life like Amara's, waiting to be seen. They already have, he said, and hung up. The whistleblower's clip. The next day, a new video leaked, not from passengers, but from inside the airline's internal chat servers. It showed Stacy and Derek laughing about the incident, mocking the public reaction. The internet erupted again, angrier, louder. Protests doubled outside North Star headquarters. Hashtags trended for days. Hashtag ground the hate. Hashtag Amara's flight. Malcolm didn't need to fire them publicly. The court of public opinion had already done it, but he still did it officially, citing gross misconduct. Then he turned his attention to the root, the system that had let it happen. Training, hiring, leadership. Everything would be rebuilt from zero. When Morgan asked how far he wanted to take it, Malcolm said simply, until every seat feels like first class. The breaking point. Days later, Malcolm sat alone in his penthouse, staring at the night skyline. The city glowed like embers. His reflection in the window looked older, wearier, but freer. He poured himself a glass of water, ignoring the phone buzzing beside him. It was a news anchor requesting another interview. He'd done enough talking. Instead, he replayed one last clip. Amara smiled at the flight school, her voice tiny but proud. I'm flying today, Mr. Rivers. He smiled faintly. For all the chaos, that single sentence made it worth it. Still, deep inside, he knew the fight wasn't over. One reform, one speech, one viral story couldn't erase centuries of quiet prejudice. But it was a start. And sometimes, the first spark is all a storm needs. The next morning, he walked through LAX unannounced. No press, no escorts, just him, a black hoodie, and a cup of coffee. He stopped near Gate 27, where a North Star crew was preparing for boarding. Jennifer was among them, the attendant who'd shown kindness that day. Their eyes met across the terminal. She smiled nervously, unsure if she should approach. He nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of her courage. Behind her, the new crew uniforms gleamed, redesigned with the new slogan embroidered under the North Star logo. Empathy takes flight. As passengers boarded, a small girl, not Amara, but another, about the same age, looked up at him curiously. He smiled and said, "Someday, you'll fly higher than all of us." She grinned shyly and ran toward her mother. Malcolm exhaled, feeling something he hadn't in a long time, peace. The message. Weeks later, he received a handwritten letter delivered to his office. It was from Amara. "Dear Mr. Rivers, my first flying lesson was amazing. I wasn't scared this time. The sky didn't look so far anymore. Mom says you changed everything, but I think you just reminded everyone what kindness looks like. Thank you for helping me remember who I am. Your friend, Amara." Malcolm placed the letter on his desk beside a model airplane, the same one that had inspired him to start North Star years ago. He smiled, folded the letter neatly, and whispered to himself, "Looks like you're cleared for takeoff, kid." For weeks, the world had debated what happened on Flight 447, dissecting every second of video, every word, every expression. Some called Malcolm Rivers a hero. Others called him a showman. But the truth, the one he'd kept buried for decades, was neither of those things. It was personal. Deeply, painfully personal. The past he never spoke of. Long before Malcolm became the CEO of North Star Air, he was just another kid from the south side of Chicago. A boy who used to press his face against the airport fence, watching planes vanish into the clouds. He used to tell his mother, "One day, I'll be on one of those." She would smile, tired from working double shifts as a nurse, and say, "No, baby, one day you'll own one." But dreams, like flights, were fragile things. At 14, Malcolm got his first real taste of humiliation in the air. His mother had saved up for months to buy 2 plane tickets, their first trip together, a short flight to visit her sister in Atlanta. She'd packed sandwiches from home, laughing about how expensive airplane snacks were. When they boarded, she'd smiled at the flight attendant, polite, respectful, and offered their tickets with pride. The woman barely glanced at them before saying, "You're in the wrong section. Economy's in the back." His mother had frowned, double-checking the tickets. "No, ma'am. These are business class." The attendant's expression curdled. "That's impossible. These cost over $500 each." For a moment, Malcolm remembered watching his mother shrink, her shoulders tightening, her smile fading. He'd seen her flash the tickets again, her hand trembling slightly. Then came the manager. Then came the whispers. Then, finally, the cold apology once they realized she'd actually paid for them. They sat in silence the entire flight. That day, 14-year-old Malcolm made himself a promise. If I ever have power, no one will feel that small again. But life has a way of testing promises, especially the ones made in pain. Echoes of the present. 30 years later, Malcolm sat in his office long after midnight, the city lights fading into rain-blurred streaks across the window. The letter from Amara lay open beside him, the ink slightly smudged from his fingertips. His company was surviving the backlash. The board had cooled down. Sponsors had returned. The airline's reputation, astonishingly, was recovering faster than anyone predicted. But peace never sat easily with him. He kept replaying that viral moment in his mind. Stacy's disdainful look, Amara's quiet courage, his own voice cutting through the cabin. And under it all, he heard echoes of that day with his mother. The same tone, the same humiliation. Only this time, he'd been old enough to stop it. Morgan knocked gently on the door. "You're still here." He didn't look up. Couldn't sleep. She stepped closer, setting down 2 coffees. "You did something rare, Malcolm. You turned anger into action. People see that." He smiled faintly. "Maybe. But I keep thinking if I hadn't been on that flight, if no one had recorded, she'd still be working, and Amara would still be crying in silence." "That's true," Morgan said softly. "But maybe that's the point. You were meant to be there." He leaned back, weary. "You sound like my mother." Morgan smiled. She sounds wise. She was. He looked toward the city. She never lived to see me fly. The silence that followed was heavy, but not sad, more like quiet reverence. The anonymous letter. A few days later, a letter arrived at the corporate mailroom, addressed simply to Mr. Rivers, from someone who used to be you. Morgan brought it to him personally, thinking it might be another fan note. But when Malcolm opened it, the handwriting stopped him cold. Neat, precise, confident. I was on that flight too. Seat 23B. 2 rows behind you. I saw what you did for that girl. But I also saw what you didn't do. For yourself. You wear your humility like armor. But I recognized your anger. I know that look. I used to have it too. When I thought success would fix what they broke in me. It doesn't. It only hides it better. The world doesn't need you to rebuild an airline, Malcolm. It needs you to rebuild yourself. If you ever want to talk, I'll be waiting. E. Daniels, Captain, North Star Flight Operations. Malcolm reread the letter 3 times. Heart pounding. He remembered the man vaguely. One of the pilots who'd walked out of the cockpit after landing, shaking his hand quietly before disappearing into the crowd. A pilot who had seen everything. The conversation. That evening, Malcolm visited the airline's pilot lounge, a space he'd rarely entered since becoming CEO. The smell of jet fuel and coffee filled the air, mingled with quiet laughter and metallic hums from nearby tarmacs. Captain Elijah Daniels sat at a corner table, wearing a worn leather jacket instead of his uniform. He looked mid-50s, eyes sharp but kind. Didn't think you'd come, Elijah said, standing to shake his hand. I almost didn't, Malcolm admitted. It's been a long time since someone spoke to me without wanting something. Elijah smiled. Then this'll be refreshing. They sat. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of rolling luggage echoed in the distance. Finally, Elijah leaned forward. You know, when that video went viral, my teenage daughter showed me. She said, Dad, I didn't know people like that could be CEOs. Malcolm looked down. People like that? You, Elijah said gently. People who look like us. Malcolm let out a quiet laugh. I didn't set out to be anyone's symbol. None of us do, Elijah said. But that girl, Amara, she'll remember you forever. Not because you're powerful, but because you saw her. Malcolm sighed. I just wish my mother had someone like that. Elijah nodded knowingly. That's the part you never say in the interviews, huh? Malcolm smiled faintly. She worked herself to death, believing the system would reward her honesty. I built a company believing I could force it to. And now? Elijah asked. Malcolm hesitated. Now I'm wondering if I just built a taller version of the same cage. Elijah leaned back. Maybe. But maybe cages can become ladders, if you leave the door open for others. They sat in silence again. 2 men who'd fought the same invisible war from different cockpits. Before parting, Elijah said, When you get tired of fixing systems, try healing people. Start with yourself. Those words lingered long after Malcolm left the lounge. The foundation. 2 weeks later, North Star Air announced something unexpected. Not a PR move, not another corporate program, but a nonprofit foundation. The press release was simple. The Amara Williams Foundation, dedicated to funding education, leadership, and aviation access for underprivileged youth. But what made headlines wasn't just the foundation itself. It was Malcolm's announcement that he would personally donate his entire year's salary to fund its launch. When a reporter asked why, he simply said, Because my mother couldn't afford her dreams. I want to make sure someone else can. Within days, donations poured in from across the world. Pilots volunteered to mentor. Mechanics offered training workshops. Even rival airlines pledged resources. Amara herself, now something of a young icon, appeared in the foundation's first video. Wearing a small blazer and shy smile, she said, When I grow up, I want to fly the plane that takes another little girl like me to her dream. The video ended with Malcolm's voiceover. Everyone deserves a seat where they're seen. The reunion. Months later, Malcolm returned to Detroit, his hometown. The air was colder now, the streets quieter. He hadn't been back since his mother's funeral 20 years earlier. He stopped outside his old house, now faded, the fence rusted, but the porch light still flickering faintly. A neighbor recognized him instantly, eyes widening. "Lord, you done made it, huh?" Malcolm smiled softly, trying to make something worth keeping. He visited the local school where his mother used to volunteer. In the hallway, a plaque caught his eye, dedicated to Nurse Ruth Rivers, who believed every child could fly. His throat tightened. A teacher noticed him staring. "You knew her?" He nodded. "Better than anyone." She smiled. "We tell her story to every class. She used to say, 'Dream big, even if they tell you you're in the wrong seat.'" Malcolm chuckled through tears. "Yeah, she said that." He stood there for a while, surrounded by the laughter of children running through the halls, feeling, finally, like something had come full circle. The final flight. 6 months later, North Star introduced a new aircraft model, the Ruth Class A320, named in honor of his mother. At its debut ceremony, Malcolm stood beside Amara and her family, both of them cutting the ribbon together as reporters cheered. The aircraft's nose bore a small inscription. "For those who were told they didn't belong, this seat's for you." When it came time for its inaugural flight, Malcolm didn't sit in first class. He sat in the very last row, beside a nervous teenage boy traveling alone to college. "First time flying?" Malcolm asked. The boy nodded, clutching his backpack. "Yeah, I'm kind of scared." Malcolm smiled. "You'll be fine. Just remember, you belong here." The boy grinned, not realizing he was talking to the man who owned the airline. As the plane lifted into the sky, Malcolm looked out the window, watching the clouds part like open arms. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was running from his past. He felt like he was finally flying toward it. Epilogue: the message in the sky. Months later, travelers noticed something new on North Star flights. When the seatbelt sign turned off, a soft message appeared on every screen. "Empathy is altitude. See people, not passengers." It wasn't a slogan. It was a reminder. A reminder born from a single flight, a frightened girl, and a man who remembered what it felt like to be unseen. And somewhere in Detroit, in a modest living room filled with trophies and textbooks, a little girl watched another plane cross the sky. She smiled and whispered, "I'm coming for you, clouds." The sun was setting over the city, washing the skyline in gold. The world had moved on since that flight, but some moments never truly fade. They live quietly inside the people they change, like echoes that never stop humming. Years later, a tall glass building stood in the heart of downtown. Its silver letters read, "The Amara Foundation for Dignity in Travel." Inside, the air felt calm and purposeful. Volunteers greeted travelers at the door, some nervous, some tired, all treated with the same quiet respect. On the walls hung simple words that carried weight. Every passenger deserves dignity. At the center of it all, Amara moved with grace and confidence. She was no longer the frightened little girl who once cried alone in first class. Her curls were pinned neatly, her eyes alive with strength. A small gold pin glimmered on her blazer, shaped like a pair of wings, a symbol of the change she carried forward. She often thought about that day, not as pain, but as purpose. Because one act of courage had shown her that silence could be broken, and that kindness, even in a moment of chaos, could shift the world's weight. Across town, Malcolm stood behind a simple podium in an old airplane hangar turned community hall. The years had added gray to his beard, but not to his resolve. The crowd before him was a mix of pilots, flight attendants, and families. They weren't there for a speech. They were there for truth. Malcolm spoke with quiet conviction, the kind that comes from scars and hope living side by side. He said that air travel was meant to bring people together, but too often it had mirrored the divisions people refused to name. He told them that real leadership wasn't about owning fleets of planes or holding titles. It was about who you lift when no one is watching. Among the crowd sat a woman whose eyes glistened with remorse and understanding. She had been on that flight too, once standing between a child and a door. Now she sat in the back, listening, learning, changed. When the applause faded, Malcolm stepped outside into the cool evening air. The airport lights shimmered in the distance, blinking softly against the darkening sky. A plane lifted off, rising through the clouds, its wings glowing with the last rays of sun. Inside the terminal, Amara walked hand in hand with a young girl, maybe 7 years old, who carried a tiny pink backpack. It was her first flight, and she was nervous. Amara smiled down at her, the same way someone once smiled at her, and said gently, "You belong here." The girl nodded, a little braver now. As they boarded, Amara paused near the cockpit door. A framed photo hung there, Malcolm shaking hands with the first all-black flight crew he had helped train. She smiled quietly, her heart full. The hum of the engines filled the cabin as the plane lifted higher, slicing through clouds and light. Passengers of every color and background shared soft conversations, trading small kindnesses that seemed to mean more than they used to. From his lounge window, Malcolm watched that same plane ascend. His reflection merged with the sky. A man who had once hidden in plain sight, now watching a world he helped repair. He thought about the little girl he'd found crying that day, and how she'd gone on to build something far greater than any company he could ever own. He thought about all the people still waiting to be seen, still trying to find their place in a world that often looks away. He closed his eyes, took a slow breath, and smiled, because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the people who refuse to forget. It lives in the moments when someone chooses compassion instead of pride. It lives in the courage to stand, even when silence feels safer. The world below stretched endlessly, cities glowing like constellations. And high above them, that same plane carried a legacy written not in headlines or profits, but in grace. Amara watched the world from her window seat, the light brushing against her face. On her jacket, the small golden wings caught the reflection of the sun, the same light that once fell on her tears years ago. She whispered softly, as if to herself, "Every story can rise." And the world outside seemed to agree. The sky opened wider. The light grew brighter, because some flights never end. And if this story stirred something in you, a memory, a truth, a quiet ache for a fairer world, then you already understand what this channel stands for. Because every voice matters, every story carries weight, and together we rise above the silence. Stay with us for more stories that remind the world to care, and to never forget the power of simple human dignity. If this story moved you, take a moment to like the video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, subscribe and be part of the change.